Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today for IFMA's webinar series. Today, we're going to be talking about navigating the technological landscape. Please let us know where you're joining us from. So I'm Kim Jackson. I'm with IFMA, and I'm joining you today from a very hot and humid Houston, Texas. Um, Joining me as well, but from a different part of the world, is Dr. Matt Tucker. He is our Director of Research here at IFMA. And we're also going to be hearing from Drew DePriest, who's the Director of Real Estate Technology with McKesson. So, gentlemen, we're here to talk about insights that we gained from IFMA's Executive Summit that was held earlier this year in Atlanta. And I'm so glad to have you here to discuss what we found out. So, Matt, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you.
Thank you very much, Kim. Great to speak to you all today. Matt Tucker, Director of Research for IFMA. I am based in Liverpool in the UK, and it is everything but hot and humid here, which is the stereotypical British weather. So yeah, really, really good to speak to you all. I'm going to be taking you through some of the key highlights that we had at our Executive Summit in Atlanta earlier in the year. Very, very happy to have Drew with us today, as Drew was a key member of the summit. And I'm looking forward to getting some of Drew's insights as we walk through this slide deck. So, Drew, would you like to say hello before we kick off?
Sure, would love to. So greetings, everybody, from just outside of Chicago. It's not as dreary, Matt, as the UK, and certainly not as hot and sticky as what Kim's dealing with down in Houston. So yeah, happy to be here. Exec Summit was an incredible time. Met a lot of great people. If you haven't been to one in the past, you should probably go to one next year. It's one of those kind of nice, intimate settings where you get to know people and trade ideas. And yeah, come out next year.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Drew. So before I kick on with the Executive Summit, I'm going to go through what the concept of the Executive Summit is and how IFMA uses that information. Before I do that, it's probably just worth mentioning about the research arm of IFMA. So I look after IFMA's research strategy and research projects. We also have a director of benchmarking as well, Nick Roker. So we kind of split within IFMA research and benchmarking as two slightly separate, but very much interlinked entities. The research agenda that I look after, it's really looking at this future-orientated global approach. So we're looking at global issues around facility management. And often it's the things that, perhaps we don't know we need to know yet, but they're right on our doorstep and ready to be hit the industry. So I saw this Executive Summit as something which is really, really important for the research element of IFMA to get involved in, because I look at IFMA as very much a knowledge ecosystem. Yes, we can research things and find out kind of future trends, future hot topics, but really, if we're not circulating that through, so it's on the ground for what our members really need, and we arm them with the right toolkit, then it doesn't really mean a lot. So understanding from a business development point of view, from a professional development point of view, and then feeding all this into a communication platform at our conferences and events, for me, is really, really crucial. So I see the Executive Summit as a key part of that ecosystem. So if I just move on to talking to you a little bit, I'll give you a bit of an introduction to what this Executive Summit was all about. You can see all these wonderful people on the screen here. So this is in Atlanta. I think it was in April earlier this year. This group of C-suite leaders met for an intensive 24-hour summit. And my job was to ensure that they don't enjoy themselves too much, and I try and work them really hard to get some key information out of them. The people that were here are an extremely valuable resource, selfishly to me, because they ooze experience and knowledge at that top level to really give a good understanding of why these themes that we're looking at are so important. So just to reflect again on the theme, I didn't really talk about that at the beginning. The reason why this is called navigating the technological landscape will become very clear as we move through some of the findings. But I think we're at this point in time as an industry that where there is a myriad of different technological platforms and systems that we can use. There are things that we're seeing on the news and what our kids are using every single day, and it can become a little bit overwhelming. So how do we navigate through all of that? What things are important to us? And perhaps what are some of the skill sets that FMs are going to need moving forward? And that's why I'm really grateful to have Drew on this call, because Drew is seeing a lot of this stuff day in, day out. So as I move through this, I'm going to be pointing to Drew to give us the real world situation with all of this. But I hope that gives you a little bit of context anyway. So what is the Executive Summit? Well, as I mentioned, it's a 24-hour intensive session, and we try and engage the industry leaders that you saw on that previous image by discussing key things to do with technology. So, you know, how for example, will AI reshape decision-making processes? How can we understand the strategic impacts that these technologies are having on the FM landscape? So, for example, how is this shaking up perhaps organizational structures and roles within our organizations? And what are the key sort of skill sets that we need to be able to collaborate with FMs? I'm really trying to use this as a collective group of knowledge and data that I was able to harness. So we did this over 2 days, where, well, it will become clear when I show you now. You can see an image on the screen here of a tablecloth with some wonderful people doodling on these tablecloths. So this whole concept comes from something called a knowledge cafe. The World Cafe Foundation inspired me to take this approach, where essentially the idea is that we are often wiser when we learn stuff together rather than apart. Okay, so that was the whole point. We had this collective group of C-suite leaders to come together, talk about their experiences, and my challenge was get them to conceptualize those experiences onto these tablecloths, which I was then able to take away with me and make sense of. And what we did is we basically pointed the discussions to those bubbles that you can see on the screen there. So we asked everybody about what they think the biggest technological challenges are facing FMers right now. Then we looked at particular expertise that we think that they will need, and if there's any particular skills there that need to be prioritized. We then focused on any particular areas or key trends within the industry that perhaps we need to be monitoring a little bit closer over the coming decade. And then finally, what inspiration can we take with this? How do we inspire change and move forward with this? So that was the basic concept. I'm going to show you one more geeky research slide, and then I'll leave the geeky research stuff behind me. But the methodology of how I took all of this, what you can see here is a few images, okay? So the first thing was to get everybody discussing those themes that I just showed you around challenges, expertise, areas to monitor, etc. They would do this in small groups of say 4 or 5 around these coffee tables, which were covered in tablecloths, and they had a bunch of marker pens. You can then see in image 2, stage 2, an example of a completed tablecloth. So there's, if you can imagine, a carousel around these tables. So Drew's group might have started on the table to do with challenges, and then another group would have started on the table to do with expertise. I give them a specific time period to get their thoughts down, and then they rotate to the next table. So these tablecloths essentially build up in their data as they rotate around the tables. And they look very pretty at the end, but trying to make sense of them is a little bit harder. So stage 3, I coded all of these up. And then I analyzed common themes that were coming out using some software. And then finally, we were able to visualize what was going on. So the rest of this talk, I just wanted to show you some of the highlights of where I felt like some of the main outputs of the summit were super interesting. And we decided to do this webinar because we think that you guys would really benefit from hearing from some of this stuff. So just going to delve into some of the key things that came out of the summit. The first one is this diagram, which I really love. And the first thing I want to say is don't start squinting at the screen and trying to read every single word that you see on there. The purpose of showing you this diagram is not for you to read every single word. More, rather than squinting and looking close at your screen, maybe just take a step back and look at the image. And you will see three clear clusters there. You'll see a red cluster, a green cluster, and a blue cluster. Where all this comes from is I listened to what everyone was saying, and I wanted to find out, well, what's actually happening on the research landscape. So what has already been written about all of this stuff that we've been talking about at this summit? So what you actually see here is an amalgamation of over 1,500 scientific research papers, where I asked the searchers to find out papers that had the term facility management and technology in it. What I then did is filter those results to show me the top words that had a minimum of 25 occurrences in them across those 1,500 papers. So if you can imagine, you've got 1,500 papers. If there's a single word, like one is standing out to me there, office buildings, that was mentioned over 25 times. And then all the other words around it were also mentioned over 25 times. And what you can see here is a total of 48 different keywords that were mentioned over 25 times. So I would say, in a nutshell, these are probably the most talked about things to do with technology in FM, basically. But as you can see by that diagram, it's quite fuzzy and it's quite complex. The red cluster is showing stuff that is kind of to do with information management and also a bit of sustainability and energy in there too. The green cluster shows a lot of technology phrases and words, more to do with systems and particular technology tools. And then the blue cluster very much looks at terms which we would associate more with the wider building life cycle, or built environment, if you like, such as building information modeling. And then what I found quite interesting is I'm going to ask you to squint now rather than take a step back, but you may be able to see two other colors in there which are not very visible. In the top right, there is a yellowy color, and the word there is interoperability. And then right in the middle, just to the right of office buildings, there is another word there which is in purple, which says integration. And I found this quite fascinating, that we've got these huge three clusters, the blue, green, and red. But then we've got two words which, to myself and Drew, are fundamental to how we navigate technology in FM, around how our data and our systems are interoperable and how they integrate with each other. But these little clusters are just kind of isolated in there. So that kind of demonstrates some of the point, I suppose, as to why we decided to have this as a theme for this executive summit. It's also worth pointing out as well, none of those top 48 words that were mentioned over 25 times in these thousands of articles, not one of them mentions anything to do with security or cybersecurity. And I think Drew may touch on that at some point later on. And that was certainly a theme which came out of this summit. So things in there to do with like risk and security, cybersecurity, it's not in that cluster there. So I just wanted to, hopefully now I've explained that, it makes that fuzzy diagram a little bit clearer to you. The next thing I wanted to visualize to you is this idea of what's hype at the moment and what isn't. I've got no doubt you're all being told about ChatGPT, you're being told about generative AI. I genuinely have spoken to people who are scared that AI is going to take over the world and people are going to lose their jobs, etc., etc. A lot of the stuff that we read in the media is definitely hype, but a lot of it actually can be very relevant to FM. And I love these two images on the screen, and I'll briefly try and explain what they are, and then I'm going to ask Drew to give his more hands-on take of them. But if we just look at the first one on the left, which you see the big curve, that's called Gartner have produced this, Gartner, the consultancy firm, but they call this a hype cycle. So essentially, what it is things rapidly rise in terms of the expectations of people early on. But in terms of their time, in terms of maturity in an industry, they're very immature at this point. And then it takes quite a long time for things to eventually plateau and become productive in our organizations. And what you can basically see there, again, you don't have to read all the different things, but any kind of term relating to AI and technology, it's all on that initial curve, which shows us that a lot of this stuff is very much in its infancy, and it's not fully proven yet how it's going to enable us in FM to be productive. It'd be really interesting to get your take on that, Drew.
Yeah, of course. And Matt, as you first showed me this image, I hadn't seen this year's version. I tend to look at it every year or so. Reminded me, if you go back and you search on the internet for, I think it was 2011 or 2012, the exact same curve where Gen AI sits today, plug-in hybrid and electric vehicles were right there in that same spot. And then it's just kind of, for context, if you think back over the last decade and just how absolutely strong and prevalent EVs have become worldwide. I mean, they're now, you can make the argument they're either in slope of enlightenment, very closely rounding the curve into a plateau of productivity. I think a lot of people would make the argument that generative AI is going to go a lot faster than that. That's a topic that's come up with, there's an IFMA runs a number of working groups on the side. So something else if folks are looking to get involved with. And for the past 4 or 5 months, Dean Stanberry, who's the outgoing global chair of IFMA Worldwide, has been leading an AI for FM working group. And this very concept of what's hype, what's real, what can Gen AI do today versus what do we all need to be ready for and start preparing for has been, my eyes have been thrown wide open, to be totally honest. There's probably 25 or 30 of us. We meet every week. There is a final white paper that is coming out. Dean's going to ping me and get on me for it, but I think in the next month. And then for anybody going to World Workplace in Houston in October, there will be a full panel session with a few of the co-authors of the paper. Dean will be there to answer questions. So I think it's too early to tell right now what exactly it's going to mean for FM. There are certainly some use cases that fit right now. I know my team is using it for things around data and analytics. If we're struggling with how to write a very complex query to merge 2 different data sets into a single view, you can go into, we have an internal chat agent and it'll say, oh, well, here, dummy, did you try this? And it works 95% of the time. So it's been interesting, but I'm with you. I think that one's going to speed up pretty quickly down that curve.
I love the comparison with EVs, and you're right, that escalated pretty quickly. So it's going to be interesting how this ride takes place with AI. I just mentioned the other diagram to you on the right. This one's taking the same information of the different AI tools and systems on the left, but it's put it into what they call an impact radar. And this is more, if you think about it from an organizational point of view, in terms of, I don't know, you think about your CTO, your CFO, what do we invest in now? Should we be putting money into this stuff or not? And you can basically see that the themes that the tools that you see in the yellow circle in the middle, they're things that are perhaps happening right now. And then as you move to the outer layers, they're perhaps things that are not really going to kick in the immediate future, but they're coming. So it's useful to just, organizations will be using tools like this to really try and map out what technologies we need to focus on now, and perhaps what things we need on our radar, but not necessarily need to immediately put all our resources into. Drew, within your role, do you see anything like this happening, where you're trying to make decisions on what different technologies are needed right now versus things that perhaps it's too risky to invest in that at the moment?
Yeah, for sure. And I love the way this graph provides context with how a foundational piece of technology is going to help enable something out in the future. So, I mean, we've been, as every large company, have been talking about digitization, moving to a digital mindset. How do we leverage things like AI and machine learning to help just make us better at what we do? And Matt, I tell you, the first thing that jumped out at me with this particular image, moving to the top left. So the concept of smart world. So smart buildings that make up a smart city, and we keep aggregating up to smart world. We've been talking about that in this space for easily 15 years now. How do we get a fully autonomous anticipatory building that just kind of optimizes itself based on a set of inputs that we give it? And I love the fact that in the yellow, in the yolk of the egg, so to speak, there's this little button of knowledge graphs. And that to me it's so new to what we're talking about. I was at a different international conference 2 weeks ago, and we got to talk about knowledge graphs in a room full of property management and facilities folks. And I'm not going to go into the full computer science PhD level description of it, but think of a graph as picture yourself and then draw a line to every relationship you've ever had, period. And some of those lines will be thicker to represent stronger, more complex relationships. Some will be thinner. Some will be family or friends or acquaintances. But you, in your own mind, you have context for what those relationships look like and what those people mean to you. And my graph obviously is very different, Matt, than your graph. You know, we have some overlap, but by and large, globally, they're very different. And that is applying that concept to the 10 or 15 different systems that operate a single facility, let alone an entire portfolio. That to me is the foundational groundwork that's going to help move us to what we've been thinking about and envisioning with digital twins for at least a decade since I've been part of the conversation. And it's fun to just kind of watch these rings. You just keep moving out. All right, we've got data architecture and a graph built. Now we can spin up an appropriate digital twin. Now we can call that a smart space because we have all of this foundational set of components below it. It's a good view, and I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, I want to make sure I can capitalize on your expertise during this webinar, and it makes me think. We talked a lot in the summit about the fact that a lot of people maybe on this call, you hear you talking about knowledge graphs or some of the other tech terms on here, and it can be quite frightening to an FM who is not familiar with what a knowledge graph is. I'm not familiar with the knowledge graph. We're just using this as an example, right? But what I wanted to ask you, Drew, is how critical is it then that FMs and FM organizations are really collaborating with the IT specialists within the organization? Because I see this stuff as really being a platform to enable FM organizations to really take that next leap in terms of their productivity and their growth. So how does that work within your role, and how does that collaboration take place?
Yeah, absolutely. And just answering your immediate thought, it's table stakes. It is absolutely a prerequisite today to try to move through an image like what you've got on the right side of the slide here. That is not something I would argue that FM can't do it alone. IT can't do it alone. That 100%, because we're taking, I know we're going to talk about OT and operational technology here in a minute, but that is very much within the FM space, right? We're using digital technology to control the physical world. So when you think OT, HVAC, building automation, lighting, to a certain extent, your work order system, your asset management systems that have to really share the highway or the backbone, if you will, that our partners in IT are providing. And the state of technology being what it is in 2024, they have to sit like this. And we cannot get to any of that impact radar without making sure that we align. So in my world, and it's been this way for probably 4 or 5 years now, over a couple of different roles, it comes down to I have weekly calls with my partners in technology right now, and we talk about what are we working on now? What projects are coming up? What do we need to engage them for their advice, their guidance, making sure we align to standards, that we fit within cybersecurity parameters. And it's just, it's not possible to do both in absent each other. So we talk a lot about requirements. We come back to what is the actual problem we're trying to solve with any of these things before we just run headfirst into some shiny new thing of a solution. And that very much comes from the IT space. They don't do anything without a requirements document. And that is something I started adopting probably 4 or 5 years ago. And it makes perfect sense. It makes doing our job within FM Tech 100 times easier.
I'm gonna, because I want to keep this conversation going, so I'm just going to jump 2 slides and come back to the one I just skipped over, because I think this leads really nicely onto a theme that came out of the summit that I wanted to discuss with you, Drew, about, and actually this resonated with me first. This may be back in March this year. We had World Workplace Europe in Rotterdam, and there was a panel discussion taking place with 3 CEOs, and our MD for Europe, for EMEA, Lara Pyman, was moderating it. And this was the first time this came up to me. And a couple of the CEOs that were on there were big service providers to our industry. And they basically said that we cannot any longer facilitate the industry from a responsive point of view. We need to be leading and advising what FM organizations should be doing. So historically, IT would facilitate the needs of its clients, but now we're moving to this era where I heard another CEO say, technology is the foundation for our growth, and if we want to be resilient as an organization post-COVID, we've got to embrace it, and we've got to have the right skill, the right leaders in the room who are going to drive that change. So there's an image on here, Drew, about how perhaps that might take place, and how this role from being a traditional facilitator to a leader might be taking place. But what experiences have you seen with this more strategic direction of IT and FM?
Yeah, I love the image. It makes total sense to me. I spend 95% of my time right in the middle. So steps 2, 3, and 4. And everything in my world, again, comes all back to what is the problem we're trying to solve. And to me, that is an outcome of connecting with our own internal clients. So for us, all of my various business units who have very unique, a wide spectrum of needs from a facilities and FM Tech perspective, every single decision that we make on the roadmap that I put out once a quarter, on the things that we talk about with our broader stakeholders within FM, every single one comes back to what does the business unit need? It's not, what do we think they need? It's what are they telling us is going to help them grow their business 15% year over year for the next 5 years, or help them expand into a new region. We have to be able to anticipate that and then support them in the back end. And I keep using the word outcomes, and it reminds me of one of my colleagues, Lynn Baez, the incoming global chair of IFMA. Outcomes is Lynn's favorite word. Anytime I'm in a conversation with Lynn, and especially if we're with internal client-facing folks, she will always bring everything back to what are the business outcomes we are trying to solve for. And if we can't collectively answer that question, then we have no business trying to push technology upon someone without understanding what that is. And once you understand kind of that step in your number 2 bucket, the other 2 around being change agents and then managing talent, that's a big shift in mindset, at least to me. Some of the best technology leaders that I've worked for they've leaned hard into kind of riding that first hill of the hype cycle that you showed earlier, Matt, of trying to find creative new ways to achieve those business outcomes and meet the requirements that we're being asked to meet, but just doing it in a different way than we always have. Can we do it more efficiently? can we have a little fun in the process? And then the last bit around managing talent, that's my favorite part, is leaning into just being vulnerable and helping your teams understand that technology, especially in the built environment, it's going to fail from time to time. And we have to be okay with that to a certain extent, barring safety problems or large financial losses. But just, as we move from outcomes to requirements to starting to compare solutions, the way we operate on my team is we're going to pick 2 or 3 and try, and maybe one works best. Maybe none of them work at all. But in my view, that's still a win, because we found 3 ways that won't meet what our business unit needs. And it's just, it's a constant reinforcement of, especially as you talked about, perception of fear of generative AI globally, not just within FM. I think the more that we can encourage folks to just engage with it and try it and see what works and what doesn't, it's better for them, it's better for their career paths, it's better for us as leaders. And then ultimately that aligns up to what businesses are asking us for.
We spoke a lot at the summit, Drew, about talent in terms of what skills are going to be needed, not necessarily, and I want to be careful how I say this, not necessarily for the FM and their job description, but for the FM function. There are particular skill sets that we need. For example, we talked about the need for data analytics, and we talked about the need for interpreting data and being able to see maybe something like a knowledge graph and go, yeah, I get what it's saying. To what extent do you feel a lot of that skill base needs to be included in the already myriad of skills that an FM needs, and versus actually just being able to collaborate with a specialist that has that skill set and the 2 of them figure it out together? Where do you see that playing out, or how?
I think that's the classic response. It depends, right? So if you're a smaller, leaner team and you're constantly going to be asked, at least I know we do, and I have been in every role prior to this for the last decade, constantly asked, especially from leadership, of, show me where this initiative is performing. Yeah, I need to understand the data behind a building optimization project. We predicted a 11% internal rate of return. Like, show me what it's actually doing, and being able to interpret that. So I think there's a lot to be said for either knowing how to largely do that yourself, to go capture the right data, understand what it's saying, and then use that to be able to tell an accurate story, versus if you have the resource and the bandwidth and other folks either in your team or outsourced, to be able to guide them to say, I need help with a dashboard or a set of analytics. Here are the 4 questions I need to answer. Can you go find the data that answers those questions, regardless of which way it goes? And I run into too many people these days of they'll come to my team asking for data and saying, I'm pretty sure that this is the outcome, I just need to see a graph to prove it. Like, well, that's not how this works. The graph may be wildly different than what you're expecting. So I think it's, like anything else with technology within FM, just the curious generalist to me is going to be best suited. Somebody who just wants to learn. There's a gentleman on my team who came up through the facilities operations side of our company and likes to tell me all the time he's not a technology person. And then I'll turn around and he's leading a change review board call to talk about how we're going to patch one of our virtual machines running our CMMS software, and what our rollback plan is, and what the maintenance windows look like. And I just message him like, this is very much a technology thing that you're doing right now, my friend. It might not feel like it. So I think the other piece of it is there is no end to a technology skill set. Just, lean into what you know and just keep absorbing it.
I liked what you said before, though, which is actually quite a simple skill that can often be neglected. It's that ability for collaborative questioning. So the questions coming from maybe the FM side to this IT specialist, they've got to be the right questions. Yeah. So if they're leading in with expecting the answer that's in their head, then it's not going to work. But if the questions are orientated towards what the particular goals and objectives are of the organization, or outcomes, as Lynn would say, it's going to be much more profound then in what you can provide to them. On the flip side, I suppose the IT specialists have really got to have an appreciation of FM, not necessarily they don't have to be the FM and know all of that technological, operational expertise that they may have, but they've got to have an appreciation of it. So it's going to be interesting to see if all of this, if we're saying all of this stuff is not going away, and if we're saying all of this stuff, we need to be able to navigate this, then the ability for these different representatives within our organizations to collaborate and question each other is really, really crucial. And I think that's come out with what you've said there on the ground. So thank you for that. I just want to flip back to the slide that I jumped over before, because this was a key, and apologies for anyone who's joined the webinar who's like, this again. But I still think it is worth reiterating and clarifying the subtle differences between these two terms, because it really is having a profound impact on our ability to really get the best out of our facility services. So on the left-hand side, we see probably the one we're all familiar with, which is information technology, okay? And that's basically all of our computers, our software, our networks, which are there really to manage our data and our information, okay? And that's the stuff that we're naturally more familiar with. On the right-hand side, we have OT, which is our operational technology. And the fascinating thing here is that all of the physical devices and assets that our FMs will operate on a day-to-day, operationalize on a day-to-day basis, they also have hardware and software in them used to monitor and control them. Now, the mind-boggling thing here, which Drew will be able to allude on a lot more than me, is historically these two functions don't necessarily talk to each other very well. And there is an increasing necessity for them to integrate and collaborate. Drew, you can probably explain this a lot better than I am, but I'm just teeing this up for you to as this came out quite heavily in the summit. How important is the integration of these two functions to FM?
It's paramount. So there's two challenges that we talked about at Summit that are very consistent with things that I encounter, have encountered, with things that peers in the industry have encountered. And it sounds like we're probably repeating ourselves, but cybersecurity being absolute paramount number one. I distinctly remember, and I've shared this story with others since Summit, Lucian Niemeyer, who's the CEO of a firm called Building Cybersecurity, used the phrase, within FMs, we should all now consider cybersecurity to be a safety issue, period. That is the only way to think about it. It is as strongly and dearly as we all look to safety. I mean, we all have business continuity plans, and we have emergency exit evacuation strategies, and all these other things that we plan for around the worst case of those kinds of emergencies. We have to look at cybersecurity as exactly the same thing. Lucian asked the audience when we were in our small groups, if you were to walk in and load up your lighting system computer in your building tomorrow, and a screen pops up that says, you've been hacked, you now owe us $10 million in Bitcoin to this address. His simple question was, well, what do you do? Who do you call? And we all just kind of looked around at each other and like, I don't even know. And do you go, your IT help desk? Do you go to the FBI or the police? Or so just kind of thinking about the answer is your enterprise IT team or your resources responsible for all of your networking and devices that fall under IT, they will know those answers. So it's only going to get more important from a financial perspective as well. If safety is number one, financial is number two. And then kind of the other big challenge that we talked about a lot as OT becomes more prevalent across multiple buildings, we as operators and facilitators have to start thinking about those systems the same way that IT thinks about theirs. So generally speaking, any IT organization will follow a global standard like ITIL. So they have full inventory. They know where every network switch, every hub, every laptop, they know what IP addresses they belong to, what hardware and firmware version everything is on. They could go search a database and tell you, I know that Matt is plugged into this switch and it's in this building and he's been plugged in for 3 hours. They just have that live, real-time, full inventory view of everything. We don't necessarily and haven't been focused on that in the OT side. And it's tied to cybersecurity. If anyone remembers, I believe it was 2 years ago, there was a critical vulnerability that got released that was part of some open source software package used in every single building automation system on the planet. And a lot of us had to scramble because we didn't know there was one specific version that was infected, that had a weakness or a backdoor that someone could get into your system through your HVAC BAS. A lot of us had to go out and dig up through as-builts and look through our CMMSs and try to figure out which version of which controller do I have. And the lesson there is the more that we start applying this IT mindset of just keep a common inventory of everything, it helps mitigate those kinds of risks a lot faster and ultimately saves money and headaches in time. So this is a big one for us. If you're not friends with your IT folks and haven't started learning from them just yet, strongly recommend that conversation starts tomorrow.
Thank you, Drew. So we want to make sure that we leave room for any questions that anyone might have, but I just wanted to finish with some of the key takeaways that came out of the Executive Summit. This is a very simple overview from the data that we captured, but I don't want to bore you for hours on every single thing which came out. So this is some of the key highlights. I'll just go over these quickly, and then I just want to ask Drew if there's anything in particular here that he would like to mention. But there was a lot of stuff that was talked about in terms of how we can better visualize all of this and understand what best practice might look at in a lot of these dimensions. So some of the recurring themes which came out of the different tables and the different groups that discussed these themes within the Executive Summit were around, well, what's the gold standard? What should we be aiming for? Learn from other industries and how they're doing it. It's no surprise. This is a historical thing that certainly the building and construction industry is normally a little bit behind the curve to what other industries are doing. So we can learn from them. And how do we actually engage with our occupants and how do we get their input into this? So trying to get practical awareness of that is important. Drew did mention about the AI working group that has been taking place within IFMA over the last few months. These are certainly themes that are coming out of that as well, which is great to see. We've already covered IT leadership and empowerment, so I don't necessarily have to go through that one again, but that's a crucial theme. What's linked to that is the next one around data standards and integration. And really, the things that we've just gone over in this webinar, they're really the foundations to enable us to create better data standards and better integration. Drew mentioned about being able to understand what the data is saying, for example, across your 15 different systems. That's a lot of systems. That's a lot of things to deal with in different formats and platforms. So how we integrate and make our data interoperable to the right standard is only going to get more and more important. And then the final one I just wanted to mention, and this is more of from a kind of human-centric point of view rather than a technological-centric point of view, which some of the others allude to. It came out really strongly in the summit that we do need to constantly remind ourselves that we should be building a risk-reward culture. So Drew mentioned, for example, about a colleague, a curious fellow, right? We need to make sure as an industry we constantly remain curious. We should be pushing and asking questions, because if we don't, we're going to get stagnant, and then we're going to fall short of things like cybersecurity. Remaining curious, whilst at the same time understanding the risks, really is such an important trait that we want all of our FM professionals to have. So yeah, that's an overall summary of some of the key takeaways that came out of the summit. Was there anything in there, Drew, that resonated with you in particular?
I think the big ones for me, the understanding best practices, just understanding process, and in some cases, in some organizations, structuring your teams a little differently, especially as you start leaning harder into technology, it is a good thing. That may be necessary to get a data analyst closer to you, or whatever it feels best for you to do. And then just the overarching, the big difference to me between construction thinking and IT mindset is construction generally tends to be project focused. We move from breaking ground to certificate of occupancy, and then we finish punch list, and then we move on. Whereas really managing OT and moving into this new frontier of truly tech-enabled FM, it's a process, and it's a portfolio. It's not just a single project and done. And then data standards integration, that could be its own 4-hour webinar. It's something we don't talk about nearly enough. We skip straight to the fun hype of Gen AI and machine learning, but it's that the data governance, data accuracy, freshness, all that just kind of basic building block stuff. I suspect a lot of us are going to be working on that for the next 2 to 3 years first.
Awesome, thank you very much, Drew. So we have just a little bit over 10 minutes left. I wanted to just put this up on the screen because we've mentioned other connecting themes during this particular webinar. For example, around cybersecurity, we've mentioned about digital risk. That was really the focus of last year's summit. And there is a report that is freely available to you guys to download and view, amongst some other really cool documents that are right at your fingertips. You can scan the QR code that you can see on your screen there, and it should take you through to the research and benchmarking page within the IFMA website. And I've just given a summary there of some of the reports that have been produced over the last couple of years with a brief description of them. Some of them to do with, what are the key trends, both now and in the future for FM. The executive summits that we've held for the last 3 years, you can see there around, very much it's been a focus around digitalization, security, and the technological landscape. And there's also a really nice report which came out only a couple of months ago around how we decarbonize our building stock, which I'd recommend you take a look at. So yeah, if you didn't have an awareness of those, hopefully that helps. And I can see our wonderful Kim Jackson has come on the screen to probably tell Drew and I to wrap it up.
Wrap it up.
So I'll hand back to you, Kim.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I want to just encourage people. I know, Matt, thank you for including the publish date on the additional learning. Don't discount something if it's a year, 2 years, or maybe even a little bit longer there. IFMA pulls things that are no longer relevant from our knowledge library, from our list of research papers. What we have found, especially with technology, even into cybersecurity, some things are moving at the speed of light. Other things, the content is still relevant, it's still valid because people are still needing to understand and learn all of these intersections and how it's going to apply to their particular situation. So don't let that deter you. Do have that curiosity, not only when you're working in your facility, in your role, but as you're looking to add to your knowledge and your expertise, is to remain that lifelong learner. I've been with IFMA for 21 years, and I have such an appreciation for this profession. It has grown and morphed and evolved. And one of our documents, one of our papers is evolution is never ending. And I may be paraphrasing that, but it's certainly true for facility management. Gentlemen, I've been watching for questions, and a lot of what I'm seeing are comments that are supportive of what you both were talking about. So I think that this topic is extremely timely and relevant, and we're going to be navigating this technological landscape for quite some time to come. I did notice about some takeaways from this particular webinar is cybersecurity is a safety issue. FMs are all about people and place and purpose. Anything that interrupts that, that would cause you to evacuate your building, whether it's a hurricane or a ransomware request, and they've turned off all of the climate controls. We talked about Houston being so hot. People will die if it gets hot enough. Buildings do become where they cannot be occupied. So treat it as a safety issue. And then also keeping a common inventory. Drew, I really liked that description and that advice, because if you don't know what you have, I think FMs are really good about keeping inventory of the physical, but this is also something that will be important if something happens within your particular chillers or HVAC, anything that's being controlled. And that was the other description too that I hope people picked up on, that technology that's controlling actual physical items. That is definitely something the FM wants to make sure they understand and that they're working with IT. So, as we look at some of the questions, one that I have for you is can you talk about what some software that's out there that have facility managers modules are? In other words, is there anything being built into the software that comes from the perspective of an FM that could help that FM?
Um,
And
that's
that
a
may
tough one.
be outside of the scope here, right? Because there's new things coming along.
Yeah, I mean, I think software in general, probably the last 5 or 6 years, specifically focused on what we do, has just exploded. Looking back at 2015, 2016, the prop tech big label that includes FM, just the amount of venture capital money that has flooded this market is billions of dollars. So I don't know if I'm specifically answering that question necessarily, but I think our options for solutions have taken off in leaps and bounds. And I think it's on us as FMs and FM tech advisors to just, again, always start back at what are the outcomes, what are the problems we're trying to solve, and working that into which of these numerous solutions fits that best, instead of, hey, I saw a shiny new thing on a webinar, let me see how I can make that work within my organization.
Yeah, yeah. And I think too that maybe the fact that we don't know that we have the answer is kind of the answer. And I would go back to Matt, what your document was showing with IT and OT, and Drew, you said this as well. FMs need to connect with their IT people. And we have a lot more commonality now than ever before, and technology is going to continue to grow. And there, we cannot always depend that there will be something that says to the FM, here's what you need to know or what you need to do with this particular software. Um, I can speak from a business development perspective. I'm sure there's people that can say, yes, my software can do this and it's going to be great for your FM, because they may really want to have you adopt that software. So the more you're in tune with your IT department, I believe that you will make better decisions about the technology that you bring in for your operations and maintenance.
Yeah, and in many cases, it's as simple as meeting those folks where they are. It's highly regimented and process driven as most enterprise IT teams happen to be. A common thing that I've run into over the years is either a server upgrade or how do we talk about OT living on IT. I need a new IP address for a new chiller controller that's coming online. I've heard that complaint hundreds of times from other folks in the space. And my experience, it can typically be solved relatively quickly. You find the right team, right person within IT that can give you an address that you need, and then just ask them, what do you need from me? Like, what are your requirements to do this thing that I need? And then just follow that every time. It doesn't have to be contentious or this, they want to contain us type mentality.
Excellent. We did get a question from Colonel Verma. How is the use of AI by FM expected to improve customer experience? Something would that justify the ROI for that purchase?
I think I'll just provide a bit of context to that, and I'm sure Drew will have more practical examples. But if I go back to the AI working group, which Dean Stanbury has been leading, this is very much something that we're covering. And you've kind of got to, we have to remember there's different facets to the ability of utilizing AI. It can be really, really useful just in our general productivity. So almost forget FM specific tasks, but your ability to just do things quicker and do things that are perhaps a little bit dull or dirty or dangerous that AI can take away from you, you know? And this is where it will really have power to make a change in terms of how we're doing things in the future. I mean, if you think about things that are dangerous, the use of AI now to remove a human from a situation and let it do it for us is amazing. I mean, we know about drones, right? They've been around for a long time, but the ability to have AI built into a drone and inspect a building on our behalf, and then tell us what they've seen and report on that, that's huge. And the list goes on and on, but it's definitely the use of it can certainly improve customer experience in many areas, both technical and just general productivity for FMs.
So
Yeah, and
something,
another
oh, I'm
plug
sorry.
for Dean's white paper coming out of the working group here shortly. We cover a lot of that. The section, this is pinging my brain, like my team specifically focused on what are the non-FM specific use cases, and then what are the ones that we're starting to hear more about that directly apply to what we do within facilities on a daily basis. So certainly a lot to absorb on that front.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of Dean, he has added a comment, and it's going to beg the question: how would facility teams change in terms of what skill sets the people on that team might need to have? So Dean says that there might be a role missing in the organization for FM, the facility analyst, somebody who has a knowledge of O&M and experience with technology used to managing building systems. What are your thoughts on this?
I love this personally. Every digital FM or facilities tech role I've had over the last 5 or 6 years has always had at least a single analyst, and that it's exactly what Dean's describing. I'm thinking back to my last role. I had a CMMS administrator, and that person grew up in facilities, was a building engineer, responding to work orders, conducting and executing PMs, but just happened to also be passionate about and enjoy technology. So they started learning the systems and how to handle data and run reports. And it's that ability to understand both sides of the thing. You don't have to be the expert necessarily on one or the other, but if you can translate across, it's going to help you serve both your FM end user side, as well as be able to translate into technology needs and requirements and up the chain of leadership. So yeah, spot on. Like many things that Dean says, I very strongly agree with what he's saying here.
All right, gentlemen, we are at time. Any closing thoughts that you would like to share? Drew, we'll let you go first.
Sure. I love the concepts of the research-driven output that Dr. Matt and team have gotten us to here. When it comes to kind of these new hype-ish feeling things like Gen AI, just keep an open mind. No one has figured it out yet. You're not alone if it still feels very confusing, and just keep learning.
Thank you. Dr. Matt.
I just love being able to talk about the research that we're producing. So, this is a great opportunity to do that. Thank you, Kim, for inviting us to do this. And a small plug: have a look at some of the other research papers that we have produced, and we want to be talking about all of them. So watch this space. There'll be new things coming out soon that we can provide you with more information on.
Wonderful. Thank you. For those of you who joined us, please be sure to like this so that other FMs who have a similar interest would also be able to find and enjoy the information that was shared here today. Thank you again for joining us. As a reminder, if you registered for this webinar or attended, I believe we'll be able to send you a follow-up email, which will include the slides that we had today. I know it was a little bit difficult to see, and some of you were really getting into it wanting to see it. So be on the lookout for that email. If you don't see it, please reach out to IFMA@ifma.org, and we'll be able to get that to you. Have a great afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are in the world. Have a good one. Thank you.